gets the full picture. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I call Dr. Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to speak on behalf of the Green Party on the Reserve Bank of New Zealand Covered Bonds Amendment Bill. Mr. Speaker, this bill establishes a legislative framework for the orderly development of a new debt market in covered bonds. Covered bonds are a type of mortgage-backed security with one significant difference, and that is that the investor has a secured recourse to a pool of assets, which is essentially a bunch of mortgages. And that is the fundamental difference about covered bonds. So this bill, if it makes its way through, what it would do is that the issuing bank would need to be registered in New Zealand. There would be oversight of covered bonds by a private third party, and that's significant, the fact that it's a private third party. And clarification of the insolvency law should one of these special vehicles actually fail. And there would be, and I think this is quite important, a covered bond limit of 10% on the issuing bank's asset base. So this is the fundamental of what's been established. Now, one way to look at the development of covered bonds is that it maintains the flow of credit to New Zealand. So it facilitates effectively what has become our national addiction to credit, and so in that sense, it is actually, you could view it as part of the problem, in that it's facilitating access to that credit. On the other hand, this is where we are. We're running very large current account deficits, and so we do need to make sure that in order to maintain the stability of the financial system, that we do allow access to this credit, but that we also regulate it. And effectively, what this bill does is provide a legislative framework for the regulation of this form of credit into New Zealand, particularly through the banks. Now, as such, because it does provide a form of regulation to covered bonds, it should add to the resiliency of our banking sector. And for that reason, the Green Party supports it, even though we have concerns. We were very thankful for the Reserve Bank for providing a briefing to us on the covered bond bill, and we support the proactive stance of the Reserve Bank, who's trying to provide some kind of legislative certainty around what is for New Zealand a relatively new debt instrument. Of course, this is not a new instrument from a European perspective. It's a very old instrument and it's been used successfully for many years, but from a New Zealand perspective, this is a new kind of debt instrument. Now, the one flaw that I think, or a significant flaw in the legislation that we really do have concerns about and we want to discuss at Select Committee is the reliance on market-based oversight of this market. So the market in covered bonds, under this bill, essentially the oversight is provided by a private sector oversight. So that means rather than the Reserve Bank itself providing the oversight, it is effectively in private hands. Now, these aren't the kind of mortgage-backed securities that lay at the heart of the global financial crisis. It's not exactly the same thing as those kind of mortgage-backed securities, but they do have many similarities. They do have significant similarities to the mortgage-backed securities that lay at the heart of the global financial crisis. And for that reason, we think there needs to be good oversight of these covered bonds. When you think about it, if they do go up to 10% of the issuing bank's asset sales, we could be looking at a market of about $33 or so billion, New Zealand dollars, which is a significant market by New Zealand standards. And the danger is that we create a market or a debt instrument that becomes too big to fail. And once we create an instrument that is too big to fail, the danger is that the government effectively has to end up bailing it out if we run into problems. We saw this, of course, with South Canterbury Finance, where the government ended up having to bail it out. But that's what happens when you have these kind of debt markets or debt instruments that become so large that you have no choice, the government had no choice because it was too big to fail, but to bail it out. We saw that with the Treasury's administration of the Retail Deposit Guarantee Scheme. One of the critiques of the Auditor General in the way that Treasury administered the Retail Deposit Guarantee Scheme was that they failed to regulate it properly. With
Order. Sorry to interrupt the member. This the cross banter that's going on, which has got nothing to do with the debate. Keep it down. I'd like to hear the member. Dr. Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The issue with the South Canterbury Finance and the Retail Deposit Guarantee Scheme was that effectively Treasury failed to monitor the scheme properly, with the result that there was a cost to the Crown maybe of a couple of $100 million on top of what it should have been. And the risk with the covered bonds, the way that this is being constructed by the Reserve Bank, is that we may find ourselves in the same situation where we've developed a market that's too big to fail and effectively the government has to step in. For that reason, we think that it is important that there is independent Reserve Bank monitoring of this new instrument, these covered bonds, rather than simply relying on a market-based oversight or a private sector oversight, which is the way that the model is currently being proposed. Now, we know that in the consultation on this bill that the trading banks had no appetite for Reserve Bank monitoring. Well, I'm sure they didn't, and that doesn't surprise me one little bit. However, that doesn't mean that the New Zealand government shouldn't have an appetite for independent oversight of the covered bond market. And the reason we should have an appetite for it is that it could be us that ends up picking up the bill if something goes horribly wrong with the covered bond market. And it becomes a very, very large and very expensive problem for the New Zealand government, as has happened previously. So one of the lessons, we believe, of the global financial crisis is that market resilience is just as important as market efficiency. So while it's true that by having more intensive regulation of this particular debt market, it may reduce some of the efficiency of the market by increasing some of the overhead costs in terms of administration, that's entirely possible. But it might be that the trade-off in terms of market resilience, making sure that we don't create a debt market which then becomes so big to fail that the government has no option but to step in to save it if it runs into trouble, that market resilience may well be worth any extra minor administration costs that come with having better oversight of the market, hence reducing its efficiency marginally. I would rather that we had a marginal decrease in the efficiency of this market by having better oversight, but ensuring that we have greater resilience in the market, given that at the end of the day, given the size of the thing, it probably will be the New Zealand government that has to pick up the pieces if anything goes horribly wrong. We'll be voting for this legislation. We look forward to the Select Committee debate. We thank the Reserve Bank for the briefing.
I call Paul Goldsmith.